Today we're going to be looking at patch 10.4 and just talking about the card changes, and I'll put up text of all the changed cards on the screen. If you just want to skim through and look at the card change text, not listen to what I have to say, that's fine. But either way, if you guys like this video, it takes a lot of work to make these. I really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel, leave a like, especially if you enjoyed it, and if it was helpful. Now let's get into it. First up, we've got the All God, changes going from 10 to 9 provisions. There's a lot of these 10 to 9 provision cards, which is fantastic for Ciri Nova. As I mentioned in the Ciri Nova discussion video a while back, I really hope they do something like this, just to make her more viable, and it goes along with the release of the golden Nekkar card, and we'll talk about the new cards in a separate video, but there's a lot of benefits from having only 9 and lower provision cards now, other than just Ciri Nova. So that's the All God change. I don't see this really making much of a difference. If you want to run All God, you still run him. We have verification from 6 to 5. Supposedly this helps answer the artifacts. The new expansion I will mention briefly has a lot of artifacts in it, so verification getting a small buff here. We have Ciri going from 10 to 9. I always want to put Ciri and Ciri Nova in the same deck, and now you can do that. Overall, Ciri still just plays for, 4, and then she has 1 damage 3 times, so she plays for 7. But if you lose, she returns to your hand. It's just kind of hard to get that to set up, and she's only a 4, so the opponent tends to kill her, so she's kind of hard to make work. But this is a nice change either way. We have the Iris Shade from 9 to 7. Iris Shade hasn't seen much play at all. I haven't seen her in a long time. It used to be in the Draco Turtle Iris Shade combo you'd use her. Now with Dwarves getting some buffs, which we'll get to later, she might make sense to include in more decks if Dwarves are popular, which is actually pretty cool. We have Lady of the Lake. She gets a complete rework, so she goes from 7 to 3, so she's now a 3 power, 8 provision tutor card that has play an Echo card from your deck. There is another Echo card coming out, so you can have more than just 1 Echo card in your deck, or 2 if you run your faction specific and Ownermancy. So, interesting point there. And being able to tutor Ownermancy is a nice effect as well. And it's nice that she has 3 power instead of 2 like most of the tutors. Morale gets from 10 to 9. Like I said, probably not a big deal. Morale is actually a really good card in my opinion. People just don't run a lot of poisons. And then we have Vesmer Mentor. This is one of the ones I specifically suggested about a couple weeks ago. When I made the Ciri Nova video, I said I think they should do this, so you can make a Witcher deck with Ciri Nova better, and they did, so it's glad to see that they're listening to my opinions. I'm just kidding, I know they didn't hear anything I said. We have Watchmen, ability change, so he just got the old ability of Lady in the Lake. He now has shield, or to give an allied unit shield. His ability before is really awkward. You'd play him and deploy, give an adjacent unit shield. It's just really hard to work with because you want to have the shield available to put on your engine card to protect it, not have the engine card already out and then you shield it. So this is a nice change for him. He might actually get some use in shield wall decks now, although I think they typically run Devotion, so perhaps not, but it's an option. We have the Kikimor Queen for monsters. So she's going from 10 to 9. Another one of those. Not that big a deal, I don't think. But it is nice to have that buff. Right now, when she was at 10, she was in the same as the Koche, and Koche is just better. So it's nice to see she gets a little bit lower provisions here. Red Rider's got the option for the 4 Frost again. The change to Red Rider's is okay, but the deploy effect from replaying a bronze unit wasn't that amazing unless you're in a mirror match and your on-L Conquerors got damaged down a bunch. You can kind of heal it with that ability. So having the 4 Frost turns back is nice. It's always good to have more options than less. And I hope they do this. Ritual Sacrifice from 10 to 8. Now, Ritual Sacrifice you really only see in the Rat Clog decks. So I'm not sure this will let you boost it enough to be into other decks, but at least that deck will gain 2 provisions there. I know people don't really like that deck, but hey, it is a deck. Alright, Ruin from 10 to 9. I like this Ruin. Ruin's kind of hard to use. You really need Slizzard to live to play Ruin, and that doesn't always happen, but if you can get him to work, he's pretty cool. So I'm glad to see this provision change here. Then we go to Skellige with the Hjalmar on crate. So from 10 to 9, Hjalmar hasn't seen a lot of play, so I think this is pretty warranted. Used to run Hjalmar in Blaze of Glory. You could then, before Ice was really popular, right? Before Ice, you'd use the Blaze of Glory to do 12 damage by setting the Yoda, and then you'd banish the Yoda with Hjalmar and do another 12 damage. But now with Ice, you don't do that very much, so Hjalmar kind of fell off. There are some high value bronzes you could combine with Hjalmar, For example, you can use the Witcher guy who's an 8, the Bear Witcher, or you could use if you have King Brand to increase your veterans by round 3, the 1 Bronze Warrior is a 8 for 4. You could banish that from your graveyard for 8 damage, and Greatsword you can always banish for 10, but you don't run Hjalmar very much nowadays, so glad to see this. Stunning Blow, damage to targets with armor, went from 6 to 7. This is pretty good. Most things with armor tend not to have just 1 armor, so it's nice to have this bonus. And again, with Dwarves getting better, this might help a little bit. I want to make a brief note here that when Stunning Blow was released, it was a 4 provision that did 4 and did 7 to armor. It's still worse than on release, which is amazing to me that Stunning Blow was so crazy when it first came out. Going on to Northern Realms, we have a couple going from 10 to 9 provisions. Vernon Roche goes from 10 to 9. I like this one quite a bit. Vernon Roche is a card that, if you have Cintron Envoys to set up, can be really fun to trigger stuff. You can pull off a Siege off the top of your deck and a Siege Engine and then trigger it right away. That's pretty fun. You can also thin your deck by 2. There's not really a great hyper thin card for Northern Realms, although you can thin your deck very efficiently. But Vernon Roche is a really interesting card, especially you get the double tempo plays with him. So good to see him getting some love. And another card we really want to see buffs to here, Queen Maeve. Provision change from 10 to 9. Her ability it's situational. You rarely see people run it or go off, so maybe if she goes to 9 provisions, we'll see it more. But I think she really just needs a bit more synergy to really do very well. The problem tends to be that with Queen Maeve, you need spawners. And most of the spawners you run in Northern Realms is, well, the only one that's really good is kind of Carrick Frigate, because you can spawn a whole bunch of volunteers with it. You have some that spawn extra guys on deploy, but if you're trying to swarm, it's kind of hard to do without like having your stuff get answered if they're engines, and if they're not engines, you're not getting too much value usually. So it's good to see Queen Maeve getting some love. Maybe she'll finally be able to fit into some decks, although I'm not going to hold out too much hope there that she'll be like top tier or anything. Then we have the 2 changes that I've said should have happened a while ago, and I'm glad they're finally doing it. Again, though, I know I had no impact on this. We have the Aretuza student. Patience is now active only on the ranged row. This is so much better, because all that used to happen is they would just play the students next to the Rafard's Vengeance to do the 2 damage and let it sit there. And movement did not answer the students. I think it was supposed to answer the students when they came out, right? You move, it starts getting its patience, you move it so it can't use that order, and that patience goes to waste. But with the addition of alumni and the addition of practice makes perfect, and it doesn't matter. All they care about is the patience number getting higher. They don't care about actually getting value from round 1. Like if you see a alumni player and they just play Rafard's Vengeance with melee, they don't care. They will just put the student next to it, because all they care about is the patience getting higher. They don't need to use that order that round. On the same note, bandart student, patience only active in the melee row. Same thing. Now, if you move it, it actually stops getting answered, or it stops increasing the patience, and movement actually is an answer. This should have always been the case. I think I said this from like day 1. This should have been the case. Movement should answer the student's patience, but anyway, now it does. Thankfully, alumni will be a bit less annoying. And if you run movement, you no longer feel like it's useless when you run into a row-locked card, and it doesn't do anything against it. Alright, now we have some big changes. Now these are the changes I'm most interested in. We have some dwarf changes here, and I quite like them. They go really well with the dwarf synergy. Let's get into them here. So we got Barclay. His ability is now deploy, give each allied dwarf 1 armor. So this is really neat. It goes well with the dwarf synergies. You give everything 1 armor. And then, if they already had armor, boost them by 1 instead. So, if you go a really wide board, and then you boost all of them up, that's a pretty big play. And one key thing to point out here is they did a change to the Rowdy Dwarf, the token. It got its armor back. It was a 2 with 1 armor at some point, and then they removed that 1 armor to nerf the token. And now it's back, so it's a 2 with 1 armor, so all the tokens come with armor. Which means that if you spawn a bunch of the Rowdy Dwarves, and there's more ways to spawn Rowdy Dwarves now, this ability gets better. So I think this is actually a really strong card, and he's still 6 provisions. So that's really nice. It's a very powerful card. A lot like Isengrim, where you can spawn a bunch of the Deadeyes, and then just, when they're all out there, you just boost them all up. He doesn't have the ongoing engine effect like Isengrim does, but he's cheaper. He also less power, so he's not quite as strong, but that 1 armor can certainly give you some synergies. Next up, we have Dennis. So he went from a 4 power to a 7. That's a big effect. And he went from 8 provisions to 7. So now he's a 7 for 7 with an ability. And I think Dennis is going to be one of the biggest plays that dwarves have now. So, new ability. Deploy, boost adjacent units by an amount equal to their armor. Now that's a card. This is what I'm talking about. Dwarves have several ways to gain armor. You have Minor, which we'll get to later, dig your Siri Buff. You have some cards with armor. And it's not too hard to get like 2 or 3 armor on a bunch of dwarves. So, even some of the dwarves come with 2 or 3 armor. So usually this will be probably around like 2 or 3 at minimum on each side of him, and that's pretty good. And his old effect, you boost everything on the row by 1. That was just, if you put him ranged and you boosted everything else on his row by 1, it was like maximum of like 12. And he was 8, and you had that set up. If you play a melee, he was 8 for 8, and that was really bad. So this is definitely a warranted change. Barclay's kind of taking over that boost the Swarm of Dwarves ability from Dennis. That's quite nice. And yeah, he's just a really good play now. And if you have cards like Zoltan, Zoltan Chivy has, 5 armor. You can get a nice boost there. And if you increase armor other ways, I'm not saying this will happen, but you could run some of the neutral armor cards like Wagenberg and such. Bandit Wagon, if you want to be meme and run Dwarf Bandits. Might be fun, might try that out. But you can probably get some really high stuff here. And then you can potentially play the new buffed Irish Shade there as well. Obviously, I don't think this will be the best way to play Dwarves, but it might be a fun way. And with a deployability like this, at 7 for 7, if you only end up hitting 1 unit with it for a couple points of boost, you can't complain too much. Next we have Figgis. This one is a smaller change, but I like it. He no longer spawns, or his power went to from 5 to 7. He doesn't spawn the Rowdy Dwarf anymore. Instead, he has the ability to move himself to the other row. Having the Rowdy Dwarf spawn tied to your defender just felt a little weird at times, and it didn't help protect your units at all. The token, I mean. So I kind of like this, and having movement on your defender as an order is actually really handy sometimes. If they have a move, say you put something big behind defender that keeps boosting, Brewer being the obvious thing here. So you just open Figgis and play Brewer, and then they move your defender, and then they can heat wave your Brewer. Now you can move the defender back. So that's nice. It probably won't come up too much, but you have it there. And I like this change. Next up, we have Monroe. Glad to see these guys getting some love here. So Monroe now has 3 charge instead of 2. This is in line with a slight change to the Dwarf Berserker we'll get to. So he's a little less strong in that regard, that the Berserkers are slightly weaker, but you get more of them. And I quite like that. There's more ways to spawn Rowdy Dwarves, so you can do it more often. And I think Monroe might actually find his way to some Dwarf decks now, which is nice to see. Next up, we got Zoltan Chivy. Mentioned he went from 10 to 9 earlier. That's all good. And then we have Zoltan Warrior. Now this one is pretty interesting. So he went from 6 to 4 power, and he went from 10 to 13 provision. So they want to make Zoltan Warrior kind of like the big finisher card of the deck other than Brewer. Because the issue with Dwarves was always Brewer was your only card. Like, Brewer was your card to get you around. Other than that, you really struggled. But now you have Zoltan Warrior. So he's now a 13 provision with 4 power. He has the ability to do damage 2 units by 3. And for each one that survived, you spawn a Rowdy Dwarf on his row. So ideally, you play him, damage 2 guys by 3, that's 10 value. Spawn 2 dwarves, that's 14 value. And at the end of the turn, he's always pinging away if he's got the barricade. So he does an extra damage each turn. That's really nice, gives you 2 Rowdy Dwarves. Pretty good tempo play, something dwarves always lacked. And good to see this here. And it synergizes pretty well with the spawning of the Rowdy Dwarves, the constant pinging damage. Pretty nice, quite like this. Now we have Zoltan's Company. Spawn 2 Rowdy Dwarves on an allied row, and give each dwarf on that row 1 armor. No longer requires Zoltan to be on the field to get the armor, thank goodness. That was just so awful to have that condition on this card. It was a 6 provision special that gave you 6 points and didn't even always give you the armor. It was so not great. Not great. But now we also have this extra effect. So you get 2 Rowdy Dwarves by default now, but you get 1 more for each Zoltan that started in your starting deck. So you can have even more Rowdy Dwarves spawn out. Like, you're probably going to have Zoltan Chivy and Zoltan Warrior in your deck. So maybe not always Chivy, but you can have at least Zoltan Warrior probably in your deck nowadays. So you can pretty easily get 3 Rowdy Dwarves, potentially 4, and that'd be pretty nice. Non-dwarf change then, we have the Dryad Grove Keeper. she has a new ability. She has Deploy Gain Vitality 2, Bond Gain Vitality 4. You'll recognize this if you've played Squaretel a lot. This used to be the Marauder's ability. But the Vitality makes so much more sense on the Dryads and in the Dryad synergies than on the mahakamarauder. So this is a really good change. I'm glad they did this. I don't think the card will be super strong, but maybe you can use it because it does synergize much better with the Dryads. Now, the change I mentioned to Dwarf Berserker earlier, he's got 1 less armor and 1 less provision. So this is a pretty big buff to the deck because he's still going to ping away 4 times if you're running the leader ability that gives you 1 armor, Mahakam Forge. So you're probably going to do that. And when he had 5, a lot of times the rounds just didn't last long enough for all the pings to go off. So this is a really nice change, especially for increasing armor with stuff like a chariot. So you can get more armor that way. So a lot of times you'd end up on rounds like 2 or 3 armor left on these guys. And now that they're 1 provision less, you have more space for the new bigger cards like your new Zoltan Warrior. I like this. It's pretty nice to see. And this will make the ones you spawn a little bit weaker, but they're still going to be pretty good cards. If you have the leader ability for +1 armor, they still end up as 8 for 4s, which is quite a nice card. Alright, then with the Dwarven Chariot, so a little bit change here. I quite like these. So you have boost self by 4 and gain 2 armor as a melee ability. So his power to go from 4 to 3, but this means that now when you play him, he's a 7, he's got 3 armor. That's pretty good. Quite nice. And then you've got the deploy range, spawn 2 rowdy dwarves in your melee route. This is a really nice way to spawn out more dwarves. You're probably going to be using this effect quite a lot if you've got barclay or monroe. So really nice to see this one. He still has the order, give an allied unit 1 armor. And you can swarm with the dwarves better now. I really like this. Glad to see it. And looks pretty exciting. I'm going to be playing dwarves quite a bit. I think a lot of other people will be too. Now we have one that, when I first saw this, I thought I read it wrong, but I didn't. So let's take a look. We have Dwarven Skirmisher. So now he's a 1 ability melee, damage enemy unit by 3 if it survived, gain an armor. So this was his ability before, word for word, except he gained a boost, 1 point boost instead of 1 armor. He has an additional line now that his order, barricade, damage enemy unit by 3. This is a 4 provision bronze that has the ability to do 6 damage. That is a lot of damage, and that is a lot of added control for this deck. So, this is incredibly good. Naturally, you're going to have 1 armor because you're always going to hit something that survives. And if you get it just on plain value, it's a 7 for 4, where 6 of it is damage. That is incredible. The thing you have to be careful of, though, it is tied to barricade, and he does only have the 1 armor from his ability, potentially a 2nd from the leader, which means that if it's at 1, if he doesn't have the leader, the Mahakam Forge leader ability, and it's just 1 armor, you can ping that off pretty easily. But if it's at 2, you might not want to commit here, and you really don't want to be spending damage cards like a 4 provision, like a tourney joust. You don't want to put a tourney joust into this, because it already got the 3 damage on its deploy value, and that just feels really bad. So this is a really good card, because you set up to damage on the following turn with the order, and then you can kind of control stuff. You can answer stuff even up to 8 with Nature's Rebuke. Very powerful. The only thing you have to mention here is that there's not too much damage outside of random pings in dwarves. Like Yarpin has 3, this thing has 3, and yeah, you don't have too much damage outside of that. The new dwarf being released, like I said, I'll do a video on the new cards separately. The new dwarf will be quite happy to see this though. But this is really good. Now Mahakamarauder, so it's now a 5 provision with the ability of gain vitality for a duration equal to an allied unit's armor. So this used to be the ability on, which Dryad? Dryad Enchantress. This used to be Dryad Enchantress's ability. And then Dryad Enchantress got changed to give like 3 vitality or 3 armor. And then Marauders got the 2 armor with the 4, or the 2 vitality with 4 if bonded. And now we're back to the Marauder now having the old Dryad Enchantress ability. However, we have Barricade boost self by that amount instead. And considering that if you're going to be running Mahakam Forge, you're going to have this have 1 armor when you throw it down, and that Barricade, that boost, that's much better. So it's a 5 provision. You really want to have at least 4 armor on something for when you do this, so you want this to at least be 8, preferably more. And yeah, you want that Barricade to be really big. the best way to do this is really with the miner. I think you run miner all the time now. You used to sometimes run miner in these dwarf decks, but you definitely want miner now. And any way to gain armor is quite valuable, because you can gain value from it on these mahakamarauders. You can gain it from it now on the newly reworked Dennis. That's really nice. So I think this is gonna be pretty strong. This one won't be as strong as Dennis, obviously, because he's a 7 for 7, and this is not a 7 for 7, it's a 4 for 5 with the boost, and he boosts 2 units, but he's a gold, so we'll see how that turns out. It might just be that you want to run both and just try and get as much armor as possible. It might be that you don't even bother with gaining too much armor, and you just happen to have armor on the dwarves, enough armor on the dwarves that is worth running, but we'll see. Now we have the miner. I mentioned this a couple times. It's a pretty small change. His order gives 4 armor instead of 2. Now that's how you set up your mahakamarauders, how you set up your Dennis, and I think it's a little bit more valuable now to kill the miners than before. It's usually before you wouldn't bother killing miners very often. It was a 2 boost and then 2 and 2 armor on dwarves, and then you put it like a berserker, and then over the round, berserker would do extra damage. But now you really have more reasons to stop this and stop the armor. Moving on to Nilfgaard here. This will be a brief mention here that Nilfgaard's double cross went from 16 to 15 provisions. I have no understanding of why double cross, which is the strongest Nilfgaard leader ability, had the most provisions in it. That didn't make sense. However, that's the only Nilfgaard change. I kind of wish there was a couple more, but whatever. Could have been given some buffs somewhere. Anyway, syndicate, pickpocket. So this is now profit 8 instead of profit 7. Used to be profit 6, then went to profit 7, then went to profit 8. I'm fairly convinced that this might actually not do anything. You're gaining 8 coins. So the reason people... Okay, so the thing with pickpocket is it is a lot of coins, and coins are good. However, if you look at the leader abilities, the one I see this being played in is lined pockets, because it gives you 9 coins, because it's a crime, so it gives you that extra coin. So it immediately gives you that 9 coins for all of your tributes, for your flying or Danian to come out, so there maybe. But the issue with some of the other ones, like Jackpot, is you really want that profit to come on units. You can gain value from the overflow, the over-profiting. If the extra coins come from a crime, not a unit, you don't get the ability to boost it, so they go to waste. But maybe 8's enough. Line pockets might, if you just get 1 card for 9 coins right away, maybe line pockets uses it. We'll see. It is a lot of coins, but it still costs 6 provisions. Bare knuckle brawler. So this guy's got intimidate, and he does have a new ability, and this isn't too big a deal, but it kind of alleviates one of the things for syndicate. And syndicate's issue is sometimes that they don't have spenders. So what they're kind of doing here is they're adding a bit more to it by giving it the ability to spend in an inefficient way. So it has fee 1, damage the highest power enemy by 1. However, if the opponent only has 1 unit, you can just knock it down with this. So that is actually pretty good. But the card itself still is just a 4 for 4 with Intimidate, and now it has this fee. Does that make it enough to be used? I don't think particularly. Some decks were running Intimidate Overload, like you make a bunch of Intimidates and then use play crimes. They'll probably be happy to see this. Outside of that, I think Sea Jackal is just a better fee card, and I don't think you want to run too many inefficient fees. You kind of want to focus on the efficient ones, but maybe this finds a way in. I'm a little skeptical. Again, though, lined pockets with all the crimes, they might actually run this now, which should be interesting. Along with this guy, Crown Spitter Thug. So his deploy damage is now 3 instead of 2. It's pretty decent. I don't think he'll be amazing still, but that's a nice change, and maybe you run him now. Again, the Intimidate card is getting a little bit of a boost here, which is good. Intimidate should be a deck that's played more, and like a synergy that's more explored in the Syndicate decks, right? It's their thing, right? They have Intimidate. If you look at Nilfgaard, they have Assimilate. You see Assimilate everywhere. That being said, it's because the other leader abilities never get any attention. But, yeah, so, you know, it might be enough. We'll see. I'm not super convinced, but 3 damage is a threshold that can answer some engines. And then again, it's not enough to answer most engines. So maybe with a bit of setup, and crimes already have a fair amount of damage if you want to put them into it. And then we have the Eventide Plunder. So with new ability, create a 4 provision unit with 4 provision cost unit with a fee. So the reason this is interesting is by the way, the old Eventide Plunder, wow, I never saw a single person play that card. But this is interesting because you have several cards. You got like Sea Jackal, you now have the Bare Knuckle Brawler, and a couple others, and it's really nice. The Savvy Huckster as well. So you can potentially get some value out of this, and you know you're getting a fee card. You get a choice in the fee cards, and it's a crime. So it helps you with line pockets by giving you another crime that gives you a unit, so you can have that unit while spawning in the unit. You get the extra coin. That was a terrible sentence. I apologize. But yeah, you can create a fee unit and also gain a coin at the same time. So it's a little bit better than just playing the fee unit, but you're not always sure what you're going to get. So I like it. I quite like it. And then last card here, Payroll Specialist. Provision cost from 5 to 4, but it loses Intimidate. So basically this goes from an Intimidate engine card with the upside of a movement, kind of like how what's the guard? The Carrick City Guard has in Northern Realms, where it was an engine card with the upside of the movement. That's kind of what Payroll Specialist was, but the engine was worse. Now it's just a movement card. It's a 4/4 with a move. If you want a movement, you run this. Drowner's definitely better, but for Syndicate, now you have this movement card. Maybe you like it as a 4 provision instead. 4 provision tech slots are kind of what people tend to run. You have like a 4 provision slot, you put in like Squirrel, you put in Peller, now you can put in Payroll Specialist for a movement if you're in Syndicate. That's pretty interesting. Not sure it'll make too big of an impact, but might see it every now and then. So that's all of the card changes. There's a couple bug fixes, a couple other things that we're not really going to talk about. And the new cards I'll make a special video on coming up later on. But for now, looking over all these cards, the Dwarves really got some love. Glad to see. Dwarves was an archetype that I tried to make several times, and it always just seemed bad. Now though, you have options other than Broover. The armor synergy, giving you more points, is really where I wanted Dwarves to go. It makes a lot of sense. And I'm excited for Ciri Nova with the upcoming changes to all these 10 provision cards going to 9. Opens up a lot more options for Ciri Nova decks, and it looks like it's going to be exciting. These are exactly the types of patch I like, by the way. Reworking the archetypes, adding in nifty effects with synergies in it. I'm glad to see the dwarf changes. They made a couple dwarf changes previously, but this is much better in my opinion. You have things you can do other than Broover, and it all synergizes with the armor, which is kind of what their core mechanic's supposed to be. And I really like it, so glad to see those changes. Do kind of wish Nilfgaard got a couple more changes. Where is the soldier buffs, my friends? Where are they? But that's okay. We'll get them later, I guess. And where's my harmony changes? It better be the next Scoia'tael archetype that they fix. But that'll be it for this one, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you made it all the way to the end, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.